some of the artists behind the camera who made this movie possible. I want to start with John Guy. He's a British historian who wrote the book that this movie is based on. He also wrote Seven Ages of Britain. Please welcome John Guy. Also joining us is a playwright, screenwriter, and producer behind the series The House of Cards and The First. Please welcome Beau Willimon. Director. She is the artistic director of the prestigious Untitled Warehouse. Her theater credits include Coriolanus and St. Joan. Believe it or not, this is her feature film directorial debut. Please welcome Josie Rourke. I like when I said that I actually heard a wave of wow. It is shocking because it's such an accomplished, beautiful film. I think it's kind of stunning that this would be a directorial debut. Before we get started, or actually we are getting started, but I always like to start when I have people as accomplished as you are by, taking them back to their roots and asking, what was your first job in the business? The first time you felt you could call yourself a director or a writer? The first time you realized, that British history was going to be your specialty?
I suppose when I was about 17, there was a professor at Cambridge that I particularly admired, and whom I'd read before I went to university, and I decided I wanted to study with him, and that's what happened. And then once it all started, I knew that was for me, and I'm still doing it. I think what I usually say is if I won the lottery, I'd still be doing this.
For you?
So my first job, I actually always feel really bad when young theatre directors ask me for advice on how to get started, because I was unbelievably fortunate. When I was 23, Sam Mendes, who had just directed American Beauty and ran at that point the Untitled Warehouse, which is a theatre I now run, asked me to be his assistant director for a year on an apprenticeship scheme that we still run. And at the end of that year, Sam offered me my first professional production on the stage of the Untitled. And that, as breaks go in British theatre, that's unbelievable. So I'm both incredibly lucky and also constantly very bad at offering advice. It says I have to get started because, it's tremendous luck.
What was that first production?
It was actually a play by an American writer called Keith Revine called Frame 312 about the Zapruder film. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Both for you?
My first name gig was a pilot that I wrote for AMC, but the way I got that was through a friend of mine who I had met. It really goes back to the very beginning for me. A small group of community of people that were dedicated to doing theater, and we were doing shows and readings for each other in the basement of the drama book shop at 40th Street in New York for about 20 people at a time, and folding chairs. And some of the people there were Lin-Manuel Miranda and Billy Eichner and Liz Merriweather and Tommy Kail. And at that time, no one gave a rat's ass about anything we were doing except each other. And it's a testament to your desire to tell stories and find an audience, even if it's just your friends, and stick with it, and you can all rise together. So I really owe, I think, everything I have to a strong community of people that just wanted to make theater happen and never gave up.
Everyone in here is so happy to hear that theater can lead to So I guess we should start at the beginning with John, because Mary Queen of Scots, I thought I knew her story, and this movie taught me I did not at all. What first intrigued you about wanting to tell her story? Because there's probably a lot of people whose history you want to examine, like her.
Okay, well, all this started, I was a professor in Scotland. I'd just come back from the USA, and when I went there, they said to me the thing that they really wanted was for somebody to write a life of Mary Queen of Scots, and I thought that will never be me. And 10 years later, I'd made 3 or 4 films for the BBC, so they knew my number. And they called me and they said that they were going to do a film on Mary Queen of Scots. It actually wasn't terribly good, but they needed some help because some of the really important documents the National Archives said they couldn't find, and I thought that was just incredible. But they knew that I would know where they were, and I found them in 20 minutes. But I started to look, I started to read them, and I realised that Mary was as much the victim of the pen as of the executioner's axe. They stole her story, her enemies stole her story. History is written by the winners, and Mary turned out to be a spectacular loser. Churchill said history would be kind to me because I intend to write it, and her enemies stole her story, and I decided that I would give her her story back so that she could once again own it, and that was how it started.
You should probably be clear that the BBC is not terrible and that we are responsible with the National Archives.
So at what point did they start talking about it as a film adaptation? And Beau, were you brought in first, or was it Josie?
No, all Josie. I'll let Josie answer.
Really? Yeah, so I think Working Title had been thinking about making a Mary Queen of Scots movie since the Elizabeth films, the Kate Blanchett ones, which are, I guess, 20 years ago now.
Isn't that long?
Yeah, they had it in their heads, I suppose. And Saoirse Ronan had been attached to this film actually since she was 18 years old, and she's now 24. So I came on it a couple of years ago. I directed a production of Dangerous Liaisons for the Donmar, and Working Title came to see that. We've been chatting about some stuff, but I think they saw me do a costume drama. Effectively, like, let's send her that Mary Queen of Scots idea. And I read what they had, which was not based on John's book, and actually that sent me to two places. It sent me to go into the biographies and work out what felt definitive and what felt true, and it also sent me to the idea that I might be able to entice or bring Beau Willimon to write the screenplay. And Beau and I had always thought we were going to work together in theatre. We've been pals for over a decade, and it just so happened in a brilliant moment. Actually, both the timing, and I think us both being very compelled by the need to tell the story, that this exceptional Mary Queen of Scots screenplay came about.
And what appealed to you about telling her story?
Well, I've been wanting to work with Josie since the first time I met her when she was running the Bush Theatre. I don't know how many of you are familiar with London Theatre, but the Bush Theatre is one of those special places. Only has 81 seats, at least in the incarnation there was when Josie ran it. And, among the most important playwrights of our time started out there. And she shepherded their work to London theatre goers and thereby to the world. So I've been dying to work with Josie. She's just also a wonderful person that's fun to hang out with. So dying to work with Josie, Saoirse Ronan, Niket Espesar, and Mary Queen of Scots, one of the great stories, true stories, ever to be told and retold. So those three boxes were checked for me right away. It was a no-brainer. But then also the added opportunity to take this story, which has been so enduring, and to look at it through a fresh lens, and chiefly the lens that John Guy has brought to the historiography. It's a story where you have these two women that were still ahead of their time and dealing in many ways with the same issues that we see now here in 2018 with incredible stakes, truly life or death. So the opportunity to work with such great collaborators on such a wonderful story and have something to say about the here and now from a story that was 500 years old but feels as fresh as yesterday. It was too good to pass up, and I felt very flattered to be asked and brought to the fold.
It's such an amazing story, and I'm actually curious because truth is so much stranger than fiction. Was there anything that maybe John found in your research or something that you wanted to include but you just couldn't because of time constraints, or maybe it was just too crazy to believe?
I mean, there's so much. John's book is so rich, and Mary's life was so incredibly vivid, and I think one of the great triumphs really of Beau's screenplay is that he's woven what is a gigantic life filled with events into what I hope feels like a story, as well as a biography, and that was, a tremendously important thing to do. I mean, there was a moment when we really wanted to include Mary's mother-in-law was Catherine de Medici. Yeah, one of the most powerful women of the Renaissance, absolutely extraordinary. And actually, I think many of the things that that Mary realised about power, she probably realised that the not inconsiderable and sometimes quite sharp and pointy feet of her mother-in-law. So, you know, I would love to have been able to include that, but, you know, it's just the canvas that you're on, isn't it? I guess.
I tend to overwrite, so my first draft was 180 pages.
It's like one of the best things I've ever read.
Knowing, you know, we were only focusing on 7 years, and knowing that I would have to winnow it down, of course, but it's always easier to cut than it is to, you know, sort of expand. And so that became 140, and then that became 120. And along the way, there was one sequence that was really tough for, I know, all of us to see go, but we had to, because of constraints. And that, you know, this is supported by the history, but Mary and her ladies in waiting, all of them were named Mary, by the way. 5 Marys.
In the same way that a lot of girls currently being named Meghan, I think, just like you get a new addition to the royal family, and goes, I'm going to call my kid that now.
Yeah, exactly. So the 5 of them plus Rizzio would dress up in drag and head out into the streets of Edinburgh, dressed as men, and sort of, I mean, you know, a Shakespearean way of, like, you know, cross-dressing and all that was real. They did it. And they would traipse around the streets of Edinburgh without any security detail, just soaking up the local life. And there was a whole sequence where we got to see them do that, which would have been a lot of fun. But you know, you have to make some tough choices along the way. And, you know, someone else will get to do that at some point, but that was a tough one for me.
Right, from someone who spent a life working with theatre budgets, it would be churlish of me to complain about this, but, you know, they did very gently explain to me that I could also build an Edinburgh suite.
Well, Beau, I feel like you have connections with Netflix. Why not do a whole miniseries?
Well, let's focus on this movie first. It's a pretty amazing undertaking, and the focus work and title were absolutely wonderful, and the support that they gave us top to bottom every step of the way. You know, when you have to cut scenes from scripts, and that's just a normal part of the process, so that you can bring the production value and authenticity to everything that you do see on the screen. So it's just a normal process of winnowing. But so I just want to make clear that they really did get behind this film and support it. And, you know, these are the types of films that aren't often made a lot these days. So the fact that they were willing to place so much faith in this story and in Josie and our wonderful actors is a testament to people that are still out there trying to tell stories that aren't necessarily, you know, comic book heroes or you know, or romantic comedies. Not that I have anything against either of those, but that, you know, I think we need a breadth and diversity of storytelling, and you know, we had partners that were willing to help provide that to a film landscape that's what needed it.
You mentioned this amazing cast, and it is, I mean, it's flawless from top to bottom. You said Saoirse was attached even when you came on.
That's correct.
Can you talk about rounding up the rest of the cast, and specifically, you did some colorblind casting of the great Gemma Chan and Adrian Lester, Adrian Lester. And was that just, do you think that came from the stage tradition? Or, to be honest, I think I would be distracted if everybody in the movie was white.
Yeah, I mean, that's very much how we think, as I'm sure, you know, everyone here knows in theatre. And I was really clear with Working Title and Focus, who were incredibly supportive of this, that I could not direct an all-white period drama. Like, that was just a thing that was not going to happen.
So what did Margot Robbie get involved? Because she is fantastic in this, and I don't know that I would have immediately thought of her for this role.
I did immediately think of this role, but I
That's
guess,
why you're here.
well, but I suppose, you know, we often say casting is everything, don't we? But I think that as part of that, it's the director's duty, whenever we watch any actor's work, not only to look at the work, but also to enter into an actor's imagination as to what else that person could do. So if I say that seeing Margot Robbie in Wolf of Wall Street made me feel that she could play Elizabeth I, that might just immediately sound strange, but actually that's entirely what happened. You know, when I saw the maturity and the intensity, the commitment, the strength, the range and the power of that performance, the idea that that might convert into one of the crowned heads of Europe and great women in history was very much in my mind. So I got on a plane, came to Los Angeles, which I did not know at all. So I sort of walked through the looking glass into this fantastic city and sat opposite Margot, who actually had read the script and was due to go on her honeymoon and probably should have been packing her bikini, but on the strength of what Beau wrote, said she would sit down with me and said, look, I want you to play Elizabeth I. And she has enormous humility. And she said, look, I've seen Kate Blanchett play this role. What makes you think that I can do it? And I explained why to her, and then I went home, and in the spirit of the film, I wrote her a letter. And she read that, and she wrote back to me, I think, when she landed at her honeymoon destination and said yes.
Wow. And, Beau, can you sort of talk about the challenges of having two leading ladies who don't meet until the end?
I mean, epistolary storytelling is, there's a long history of that, but it tends to exist more in novels than it does in film. So certainly when you have these two characters, who are the focus of the film narratively insofar as their relationship with one another, either as rivals or as compatriots. Because a big focus for the film for us was how these two women at this time there was only one other person that could understand what it was like to be in their shoes, and it happened to be their rival. So they were sisters as much as they were enemies. And one of the sort of drama writing 101 things is get people in the room together, and you didn't have the opportunity to do that with this story. It was really thinking about how can we juxtapose what's happening in each of their lives concurrently in a way that makes it feel that beyond the letters themselves, which we hear performed over images, we're also feeling that these two lives are orbiting one another, even when they're not directly speaking to one another. And that was the challenge, and I think Josie did a wonderful job in dramatizing that, and certainly working on the editing side to really make you feel that connection, even when they weren't physically together. And of course, we made the choice to ultimately lead to a scene in which they do meet, and the story demanded that.
It's interesting, I read a glowing review that actually compared this to Heat, when Robert De Niro and Al Pacino finally meet, which I thought was one of the best comparisons I've heard.
I was actually enormously gratified by that because that's how I pitched it. I was like, this could be a Renaissance Heat. And my brother texted me this morning with that circled in a screenwriter review.
But that was so funny. My friend wrote that review. I'll pass it on. It was a good review, so I can let her know. And John, what's it like for you? Because these people have been in your head, and you've been, writing about them for so long. What is it like to see it actually realized in a production like this?
Well, it's quite extraordinary, and I also learned from it. One of the things that Josie did, which I gather is not so usual in the movie industry, is that there were 2 weeks of rehearsals, before anyone went off filming. Effectively, those were run like seminars, and theatre style, but they were, to someone coming out of the university background for quite a long time, they were effectively, seminars. But by the end of the first week, having gone through the script, scene by scene, and discussed all context, points of view, all of those things. By the end of the first week, I remember on the Friday, Martin Compton suddenly said something. I said, that's not Martin Compton speaking, that's Neil de Bothwell. You're in character. And then after that, it gelled, and people were just in character. And so I think, you would probably say that when people actually then went filming, so much was psychologically imprinted as to what these characters were in their heads, that the thing was going to have an authenticity, from the start, which might have come later in the shoot, but actually was there from the start. But can we just go for a minute? Can I just say something about the meeting? Because a lot of people think that I should be absolutely shocked that history, if you like, was doctored. In the UK, the history police have been out a little bit. How can I be a party to something in which something that's essentially fictional took place? But actually, I'm afraid I have a trump card today. If trump's not the wrong word. In 2010. Some new documents appeared that had not been seen since the 1830s, ripped out of the letterbooks of Sir Ray Sadler, who was the penultimate keeper of Mary Queen of Scots, the penultimate jailer in England. And in that bundle of letters, there was a letter from Elizabeth to be read to Mary. This is only 18 months before she was killed, so it's very late in the story.
And Elizabeth is saying, here we were, two neighbouring queens, two neighbouring British queens on the same island. I tried to make it work. Where did it all go wrong? Why do you conceive this just jealousy, as she put it? That's Mary. Why does Mary conceive this just jealousy against me? But if you want to restart the conversation, send one of your secretaries to me and we'll see where this goes. Now, that was, I tell you, that was the letter that I always knew had to be there. But I could never find it, and of course the reason was, it was buried in a private collection, but it reappeared. And that was, in a sense, the vindication of the whole story that I took, because the last thing that Elizabeth ever wanted to do was to kill a woman she regarded as a sister queen. The big misconception is that these two women were somehow mortal enemies from the beginning of the story. That is absolutely not the case. From the beginning of the story, woman to woman, and Mary always thought that if they could actually meet woman to woman, they could settle their differences, and a lot of the time Elizabeth thought that too. Far from mortal enemies, they were, as it might whimsically be said, they were both fully paid up members of the Women Monarchs Trade Union, trying to maintain their power in these courts where there were these slippery, treacherous, even reptilian men, trying to grab power and push them to the side. So, this story doesn't just change the way that we look at Mary. And this is history, this is not, fiction. It changes Elizabeth's story too. And for this reason, I feel that, okay, the meeting in history, it never happened, but, early in the story, it very nearly happened. And then it had to be cancelled because of events in Europe. But then, this new evidence proves that even towards the end, in Elizabeth's mind at least, and certainly in Mary's, there was still this hope that somehow they could sort this. And I just think the sooner. Actually, I published this information in a book that I did in 2016 called Elizabeth: The Forgotten Years, and it is buried in it because they were forgotten. And it's buried in chapter 4. It ought to be better known.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just sum up by saying, if you don't take Margot Robbie and Saoirse Ronan and put them on the screen at the same time, you're an idiot.
I'll take some questions from the audience. I can see any of you. Okay, I see a hand over there. Go ahead.
Hey, congratulations on your director. I really do. That was a home run.
Thank you.
I wondered if you would comment on the costumes and the wardrobe.
Oh, God.
Because they were absolutely breathtaking.
The costumes, the makeup, everything is
I wanted to see how those were put together for your cast, how historically, how you compare them to pictures that were taken from that era.
Sure, thank you. That's a lovely question to be asked because I had one of the great collaborations working with Byrne, who's an extraordinary woman who designed the costumes on this movie, and with Jenny Shercourt, who did the hair and makeup. Both of those women worked on the Kate Blanchett Elizabeth films. And they are brilliant artists in the sense that they knew what they did on those films, and what they wanted to do was to push both their knowledge of the period and also challenge themselves as artists with what they did. And I'm from theatre, that's all about collaboration. So when Alex said to me that she had this idea that what she wanted to do was to make all of the costumes from denim, as a theatre director and someone who understood what it means to have an artist come to you and say, I just want to work in this medium, it will do an extraordinary thing as a visual artist. I was tremendously excited by that. So all of the costumes that you see on that screen, apart from the final 3 looks that Margot wears that are based on portraits that you can find of Elizabeth, are made of denim.
You're kidding.
Wow. Yeah, isn't that cool? And different mixes of the fabric. Some of the women's clothes are shot with silk to get that kind of vividness of colour where we need it. But it also gives you this incredible textural uniformity. It also makes men's legs look good. But this is really important. Okay, John Barry will tell you that this was a period of history that fetishized the male leg. So you'll see those, Renaissance portraits of men in sort of the equivalent of kind of micro-mini, showing a lot of leg and calf. And look, no disrespect to anyone in the audience, but not all actors have fantastic legs. They don't. And actually, it can be a very practical level, it can feel hugely exposing to wear a pair of hose. you don't feel in your body, you're not comfortable, you don't feel necessarily sort of sexy and confident about yourself, but also you can't give performance. So we work very closely, Alex Byrne, an amazing choreographer, who's the resident choreographer at the Royal Ballet, Wayne McGregor, actually to think about how to dress people and how to do this take on this period that feels authentic, and absolutely, they both have deep knowledge of how that works, but also is really thinking about the actor and their body and how we can give the incredibly bold and uniform palette to the movie.
That's amazing. And by the way, I don't know what your budget was, but I know this is an independently financed movie, so I don't think you were working with a huge budget, and everything you accomplished, it's a period piece with all this outdoor locations, these costumes and this makeup and the hair and everything. It's phenomenal.
I mean, people work so hard. I mean, that's the other cool thing about denim is Alex could then make everything because it's a cheaper fabric. So every costume you see on that screen is designed by her. So that's one, it's not from stock or store, which you often do in period, but yeah, and the ambition of where we shot, both coasts of Scotland, we moved around a lot. We said to ourselves, whatever the weather, we would shoot. And I was just, I've never been paid to work outdoors. So I was standing on the side of a mountain with it. Yeah, but in the last couple of years, I'm like raining horizontally into my ear. I love it.
Take one shot right through the middle.
You started to do this in the last question, talking about collaboration. I'm just hoping you can talk about the process of you translating your extensive experience in theater to your first film. In terms of, you've discussed rehearsal and stuff, but can you take it a little further? Yeah.
Did we get that? Or you're good? Okay.
So it's my job to bring the best out of people. And you bring the best out of people by collaborating with them. And when we say collaboration, I think that means listening, and really nuanced and deep listening. I think it also means decision making. So actually, you have to listen but also choose. And I think it involves trying to bring everyone to a level of excellence in which they share. That's what that means to me in theatre. That's how we make great theatre. And listening to Beau's great story about the drama bookshop, which I think is endangered, isn't it? Can I read that?
Yeah. There's an effort to try to keep it alive.
Yeah, let's keep that alive. But to get a sense not only of camaraderie, but I think also what John was alluding to in rehearsal, which is, we talk a lot about world creating, like I read a lot about that in cinema, and often that tends to speak about the visual or the music or, any of those things, but world creating is also about performance. It's about everyone understanding what they're in and being in the same thing. Like so much story, so much world, I think, is carried by that. Be that the body or the voice or things that you know from theatre, or just, when you look your fellow actor in the eye, you know where you are, you know what scene you're in, and actually there's a level of confidence that then gives you risk and experimentation and pushes you to greater and greater heights. That's what that means to me.
I'm so sorry that we're out of time, but I want to let everybody know that this movie opens in theaters next month. Please spread the word.